Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's fourth Building Bridges session, brought to us by Reconciliation for Western Sydney. Tonight, we'll be listening to Lynda-June Coe, and she'll be talking to us about it, and I will introduce her in a moment. Lynda has asked me to do the acknowledgement of country, which I shall do now to begin tonight's proceedings. We wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. For me, the Darug and Guringai people. And we pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and commit ourselves to work together for reconciliation. Thank you. Now, tonight, tonight's sessions brought to us by, put on by Reconciliation for Western Sydney. I should just point out that this is a grassroots organisation founded in 1997. It's based in Western Sydney and focused on learning from and with Indigenous people and supporting a future Australia based on voice, treaty and truth. Firstly, let me welcome people from around Australia and perhaps even internationally. Tonight we're going to be hearing from Lynda-June Coe. She is a proud Wiradjuri and Badu Island woman from Erambie, Cowra, New South Wales. She is a cultural educator, teacher, activist and PhD candidate, currently living in Wonnarua Country. She is a representative of fighting in solidarity towards treaties. Now, tonight's discussion is about why a treaty is still required today and how a path towards a treaty could look like. Lynda will look at practical ways to address self-determination and how we can support communities to overcome the legacy of colonialism, poverty, racism and marginalisation. Now, I'll just point out that during tonight's talk by Lynda, who'll be talking for roughly half an hour, if you have any comments that you would like to make or questions you would like to pose to her, you're welcome to use the chat line, which is at the bottom of your screen. And at the conclusion of her talk, I'll refer to those questions and ask Lynda and if she could speak to them. We'll have so we'll really have an hour or so, but Lynda has expressed she's very happy to continue the discussion, but we will need to be finished by really about 8:45. But Lynda is in agreement with us on that. So without any further ado, I'd like to pass over to Lynda and again welcome her to our Building Bridges session tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for that introduction, Jonathan. I'd like to start by honouring country and pay my respect to the Wonnarua people and their elders, and give thanks for allowing me to be a guest on their homelands for the past 3 years. I'd also like to extend that acknowledgement right across country and acknowledge the very vast and diverse Aboriginal nations that still exist, and acknowledge their unceded sovereignty. Thank you, Building Bridges, for the opportunity to speak here this evening. I'm going to apologise outright. I don't have a plan, so I'm going to just have a yarn. All right. The theme that I'm been asked to speak to is around treaties, but in order to have an open and honest and robust discussion around treaties, we need to have a deeper understanding of what sovereignty is and the issues around justice and what justice actually looks like for Indigenous peoples. Because the likelihood is that our conception of justice is totally different to what non-Indigenous people perceive justice to be. I'm also going to speak about a little bit on truth-telling and decolonisation, as well as my involvement in the national dialogues, which culminated in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And then I'm going to finish off on my ideas for a pathway forward. So I hope that gives some kind of outline of where I'm going to go, but just bear with me because I don't have a plan. So yeah, can I quickly do a shout out? I can see some familiar faces there. My sister girl Leanne, Yirra Talia, John, I can see you there. Good to see your faces. My perspective obviously is from a Wiradjuri and Badu Island woman's teachings from my elders and my family, my clan and community up there in Erambie. I'd like to honour and pay my respect to our ancestors as well, because it's through their sacrifice and their resilience and their love that we are here still surviving in the colony today. The issue, and I need to speak to it outright, I'm going to address the elephant in the room in terms of reconciliation and in hope of restoring a pathway forward. And that issue is white supremacy. We can talk about the symptoms of colonisation, whether it be genocide, cultural genocide, ecocide, child removals, high incarceration, the structural, systemic and institutionalised racism, police brutality, Black deaths in custody, power and gendered power. All of these issues stem from the idea that white people are superior to every other race on the planet. I believe that, in all honesty, it's going to take white people to address this issue of supremacy in order for it to become undone. Black people have been talking about this for hundreds of years. Our subordination, our subjugation under colonial regimes is not a new discourse. We've been talking and screaming loudly about it for a long time. What we need to be looking at and addressing very openly is the issue on how white people are going to address this problem of white supremacy and how they're actually going to undo it. Because we can talk about treaty and we can talk about reconciliation, but there can be no reconciliation if I'm deemed inferior, if I'm deemed less than. So I'm going to leave that with you as I go through my talk. So here in Australia, you know, dating right back to 1770 with the British proclamation of sovereignty, their claim of the doctrine was claimed under the doctrine of terra nullius, but it was legitimised through terra nullius, and that our people was non-existent. that classification was deemed based on, once again, white supremacy. It dehumanized Indigenous peoples and it rendered them sovereignless. We have been living under that classification for 250 years. In 1788, what followed was invasion. It was a military agenda to sustain terra nullius and to pretty much practice this logic of elimination and erasing Indigenous peoples from the continent. I wrote an article for Indigenous X not too long ago, speaking about what I call and what my elders have taught me to be an undeclared colonial war. The fact of the matter is, at the crux of our conflict is land and how we're actually going to live on this continent and share it. The problem is that the settler state has put a structure in place to maintain dominance and to appropriate Indigenous land at all costs. Now, Black resistance has maintained, a front line to that erasure and to those appropriation of land. Our resistance is grounded in the fact that we do exist. We have existed on this continent since time immemorial. And on this continent, in 1788, there were over 500 diverse and distinct Indigenous nations operating at the time. Each of those nations possessed their own governance, their own laws, their own culture, their own religion, and their own languages, including land management and other resource management systems, which were built on empirical knowledge, which was acquired over a span of 3,000 generations. Each of those 500 different nations are sovereign entities. That is the position of Indigenous sovereignty today. It has never been ceded and it has survived 236 years of British occupation. In order for us to talk about treaties, we need to acknowledge, well, I don't need to acknowledge, the state and the wider Australian population need to come to the grips with the fact that these 500 different nation groups are legal sovereign entities within their own right. We can have these feel-good attempts at recognising and acknowledging country and stating, that sovereignty has never been ceded, but, we're erring towards it just being labelled symbolism. We need to address sovereignty practically, in a practical measure, sorry. And what we, I noticed in Lydia's discussion around treaties, is that the state treaties are very much state agreements. They're not recognising the clans within the state as their own autonomous independent groups. And from that design, it's a state determined trajectory, and the outcome will be to benefit the state, not Indigenous peoples and Indigenous land. I think we can learn from, these processes at the state level, that the aspired outcome of these state-based treaties is to maintain dominance and power of Indigenous peoples and to ensure our compliance in order to, to share parts of the economy, to share land, and to have some form of recognition of our existence. Now, if you look at international examples of treaties, even though they've had their sovereignty recognised, the colonial state still has maintained power. And and essentially what those Indigenous peoples have become are domestic dependent nations, or how I like to call it, domestic wards of the state. So we are still dependent on the state for our own access to resources, our own access to land. And what treaties don't actually provide is some form of certainty, some form of protection that we're no longer going to be subjected to colonisation. Yeah? So we need to start looking at treaties critically, in that they actually legitimise the process of colonisation. Yeah? They legitimise dispossession. They are an instrument to benefit the state, not Indigenous peoples. So that's why, you know, here in Australia, you know, we've been saying that we're the only Commonwealth nation that does not have a treaty. So in that sense, we've got a blank canvas. We can start looking at examples of where Indigenous people's interactions with the state are positive, and they are progressing, and they are maintaining their culture, their language, and their laws as well. For instance, the Sami people, who have established their own self-government, which is funded by the state. It does recognise their own autonomy, and it does recognise the need for Indigenous people to control their own affairs. That example, that framework could work here in Australia. Indigenous people want control of our own affairs and our own land. Okay? I think when we look at justice, it always gets conferred to social justice, but Indigenous justice has a lot more depth, and it has a lot more meaning for me. In my mind, justice for me is about the repatriation of land. Land needs to come back to the original owners as a form of restitution. Excuse me. We need to be afforded, well, what Lydia Thorpe calls paying the rent. And we also need to be compensated for crimes such as child removal, which does fall under the Convention of Genocide as well. We need to be compensated for cultural loss, our language, and our identities, which have been lost as well. We also need to be accorded the right to exist freely and unharmed, and free from constant surveillance from the state. What I view this as is a leave us the hell alone policy. Yeah, it's our right to conduct ourselves as Indigenous peoples on Indigenous lands in accordance with Indigenous customs. Okay, so yeah, that's how I interpret justice, and I'm going to leave it there in hope that it does raise a few questions in your mind too about how you view justice, in that it actually requires you to challenge yourself, challenge your notions of how you're going to share power and privilege. In order for these ideas and these concepts to hopefully come about, you know, we keep talking about truth and truth-telling. Once again, white people need to grapple with the fact that white supremacy is fundamental to the race problems that we have in Australia. Yeah? We need to be having these conversations not only amongst ourselves at the dinner table, but within the workspaces. You know, we've seen throughout history here in Australia that it's through social movements and political activism that creates social change. You know, it's the mobilisation of the masses and the movement buildings that creates political pressure and for governments to act in accordance to what the citizens of this country actually aspire, not what they want from the top down. So in many ways, you know, I'd love to see, as an Indigenous person, white people taking to the streets, mobilising against white supremacy and calling for it, for this country to become anti-racist, to become anti-colonial, you know? Those are some dreams that I have as an Indigenous person. And I hope that for Australians, in order for them to understand themselves as Australians, we don't live in a free country. This is not a free country. This country is stolen land. So, yeah, we need to look at pathways towards decolonisation. We need to undo the damage of colonialism and settler colonialism, because blackfellas are not going to go anywhere. And what we've seen through, you know, the uprising through the Black Lives Matter movement is that there is a push for change. Yeah. We need the psyche that's embedded within the Australian governments and its institutions to actually be dismantled. We need to destroy racial hierarchy. And we need to start looking at ourselves as different peoples with diverse cultures. And we need to celebrate it. I understand that racism has been around for a few hundred years, you know, and it's going to take a few more 100 years to undo it. But if we start planting the seeds today, then at least the next generations that follow have something to pick up and walk forward with. And I've mentioned, you know, some of the symptoms that impact my mob, but some of these symptoms are actually impacting all people: capitalism, commercialism, you know, the environmental crisis that's facing us all. We need to acknowledge the fact that the Western system is collapsing and it's taking everything down within its path as well. If we're going to have a chance at defending humanity, we need to stand together. And we need you to stand beside Indigenous peoples, because we've lived on this planet, we've lived on this continent for 80,000 years, since time immemorial. We know this country, we belong to this country. And it's going to take a major turnaround for non-Indigenous peoples to view and think and look at this landscape the way that we do. Because it is full of richness and it's full of beauty. And until you can actually hear it sing, will you understand the relationship that we have with this country? But she is crying out. And that's why Black people, my mob, are still along those front lines. Okay. I'm going to move on now and have a quick yarn about my involvement in the Uluru Statement. So I participated in the Dubbo Dialogue in May 2017. The dialogue was very exclusive. It was to the point that it was secretive. It was invite only, and I managed to get involved through word of mouth, in that I knew someone who knew someone, and that's how I got access to it. Unfortunately for other mob, they were refused entry. They were turned away. Their voices were not valid in the dialogue that I attended. The Referendum Council presented what they perceived to be a solution to all of our problems. The government wanted them to ask Indigenous peoples what they wanted. And the Referendum Council asked us, and we said we wanted our sovereignty recognised through the apparatus of treaty or agreement making. We don't want our sovereignty to be ceded. We want to ensure that there is certainty that our rights as sovereign peoples is protected. And we don't want symbolism as well. What eventuated in Uluru was pretty much a circus of conservative, I don't like talking about my mob in this way, but blackfellas who have been working in governments for too long. They have become bureaucratised and no longer think as First Nations, but have been co-opted within the Western system. And that's essentially what colonisation does. It happens, it infects the way that we think, it infects the way that we think about ourselves. And so essentially, we were silenced up there as well. What the Referendum Council indicated to us in the dialogues didn't actually eventuate in Uluru. There were key speakers, and any kind of dissent or debate was silenced from the outset. We weren't allowed to engage as people who were mandated to attend. So essentially, the convention was a process of manufacturing consent based on the perception that they were nation building, they were building consent, well, the perception of consent. On that directive, myself and a few other participants from the Sydney dialogue, the Melbourne dialogue and Tasmania, I believe, protested. We deemed the convention to be null and void on the basis that it did not fall into line with our values and our customs and protocols as First Nations peoples. It had a corporate agenda and it had a corporate outcome. An advisory body to government without veto is toothless. We don't want to waste our time by going back and forth with conservative mob around the wasted resources involved in arguing why an advisory body to Parliament is a waste of time. We want treaty, we want our sovereignty recognised, and we want justice. Now, in order for non-Indigenous people to understand that, all you need to do is have a look at the major sponsorship behind it. When big mining companies like BHP and Rio Tinto openly endorse an agenda like the Uluru Statement, big questions start to, you need to start looking into it a bit deeper. Given, the complete disregard for Indigenous culture and their outright arrogance with destroying sacred sites such as Juukan Gorge, I believe that the statement itself is for the benefit of multinational companies and those who have a vested interest in Aboriginal land. So I'm going to leave it there because, in all honesty, what happened up there in the convention was traumatic, given that those who protested were subjugated to punishments as well. We were threatened with tribal law. And given that we were under the impression that this national convention was a gathering of First Nations and that it should have been on neutral ground, our right to speak as First Nations wasn't allowed, it wasn't permitted. So as in terms of Aboriginal diplomacy, that wasn't the process which the National Convention was undertaken. Where we are today, I used to be a believer in treaty. I used to believe that it was the right way forward. Now, after seeing what's happened down there in Victoria with Djab Wurrung, and the fact that, you know, kids as young as 10 years old and 11 years old are killing themselves, are committing suicide, I have no faith within the rest of society, in that I don't hear your outcries. I don't see your dissent. I don't feel your anger towards these abuses of my people. You know, we are still oppressed. Our communities are still living in third world conditions. We are still on the front line trying to defend against a state regime which doesn't give a shit about how we feel. We're still dehumanized. Given the fact that our sovereignty has still not been recognized, you know, our non-existence is, it's plain to see, pretty much. So yeah, I'm always going to lean towards the idea that we need to revolutionize. I'm always going to lead towards the idea that in order to transform society, we need to dismantle the current structures that are in place. And it's going to take, you know, the rest of the population to wake up and realize what's happening, because it is injustice in its entirety. And people's consciousness needs to start raising in order for us to move forward, not only as human beings, but as people, as a collective, with morals and with values. So I'm going to leave it there because I'm getting really emotional. It's not easy, you know, we're living under constant duress. And just seeing what's happened down there, Victoria, it makes me realise that, yeah, we've still got a long way to go. And I'm going to close it by saying, by quoting Sissy Austin and saying that this government is gammon and so is their sugar-coated treaty. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Lynda, for speaking to us in such a powerful way. You've given us some new perspectives.
I hope I have. I feel like sometimes, you know, when things just are a bit too raw, the emotions get the better of me. Yeah. You know, and then I lose all track of thought. So I hope I've challenged you in some way that's made sense.
Oh, but what you've based your perspectives on are the reality. Are the reality of what's happening, and that's the galling thing, that it's still happening and happening and happening. That denial continues, persecution continues. We'll open the floor, and I'll be reading out some of the chats that have progressed as you were speaking, Lynda, and it was once again a very powerful statement, but it's something that, yeah, we hear. And and more people need to. Phil Bradley mentions, hi, Erambie from Burramuttergal, Durrag, stolen land and waters. Yes, non-Aboriginal people must reconcile with our forebears' murders, past and current injustices to Aboriginal and Torres Strait First Nations people. Klaus mentions the Wonnarua Country shame that Victoria has done with the destruction of the trees. Talia mentions great concept of compensation and return of land, and leave us the hell alone. She mentions this works well in Greenland for the Inuit peoples.
Yeah, we need time to heal. We need time to regenerate and restore our practices. And in order to do so, you know, we need the privacy to conduct ourselves as mob and reconnect with family. Once again, it feels, you know, and I think just coming through this year with COVID and whatnot, family has just become more important living in these conditions.
Yeah. Now, Nita posed, she, how would that play out in a practical sense to be left entirely alone?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's pockets of land, i.e. through Crown lands, native parks, etc. We need spaces to be returned that allow us to practice our culture, allow us to practice our ceremonies, even within urban settings as well. You know, there is the biggest population of Indigenous people who live in Western Sydney. There is native parks, there is parks still within those areas. They can be returned. They can be, you know, closed off to the public for the sole enjoyment of Indigenous peoples. And if we want to open it up, then we open it up, because our culture is based on sharing.
Yeah. Thank you, Talia, for that response there. But now Talia asks, Lynda-June, please explain the power of taking to the streets versus sitting at the table with government-appointed leaders. Can you comment on that for us, please?
Yeah, I think, you know, it depends on the dialogue that you're prepared to have at the table. You know, if you're willing to talk about the root causes of child removal, of deaths in custody, if you're willing to call out, like I've mentioned, white supremacy and how racism is, you know, and power, the intersections of power. If you're willing to hold them into account, then by all means, you know, more power to you. The difference in the streets is that we don't make no apology for being there.
Yeah.
It's the only space that we are allowed to be seen and allowed to be heard as well.
Okay, thank you. Can I just read out another comment from Bernadette? Brilliant, Lynda. Listening as a descendant of a settler, truth-telling is so important.
It is. And in order to, you know, build a relationship, because in all honesty, we've never had one. So how can we reconcile? We need to have truth seeking, you know, and we need to have it openly, like I've mentioned, and go to the core of it, not just talk about the symptoms all the time, but go to the root problem.
Yeah. Jens, I have the feeling that many Aboriginal topics are very advanced for the average person who wants to learn about Aboriginal culture. As an educator, do you sense the same?
Yeah, I do. But what I find difficult to grapple with is how white people don't understand their own culture. Yeah, I find it difficult in that white people don't understand their own origins and how colonization actually works. Yeah, so Indigenous people are always, expected to talk about and educate white systems. The onus isn't on us.
Yeah. No, I understand. Yeah. Sorry, I dropped out momentarily there. It's
All good. I can have a break.
no, Lynda, oh no, there's no break for you here because Nita asks you, apart from the process, do you have any issue with the actual final product of the statement?
No, I don't. I don't. In all truth, as a people, we're all trying to navigate colonialism. We're all trying to find solutions. How we get there, that's not something that I can, control. But I am weary though, and I have genuine questions around the actual intention behind such major sponsorships such as BHP and Rio Tinto.
Oh yeah, because haven't they shown some form lately? I mean, the Juukan Gorge destruction.
Absolutely. And in many ways, it feels like the voice was constructed to derail grassroots movements. In many ways, it feels like it's been an exercise to co-opt the grassroots voice as well. And whilst the voice is dangled around like a carrot, we still don't actually know what the framework looks like. Who's going to be a voice to Parliament? Who's allowed to be involved in the process? We don't. One thing that I can definitely say over the last 20 years is that we need to move away from self-appointed leaders and leadership as well.
Where will self-appointed leaders? Could you explain that a bit more?
Sure. It actually came about during the John Howard era, where he appointed people such as Noel Pearson. And he was the actual first Indigenous person that he referred to as an Aboriginal leader. So, when someone with, who's done so much damage in the Indigenous affairs portfolio announces someone as an Indigenous leader, it does raise some concerns.
Yeah, understandably. Yeah. Could I make from Ian McIndoe to everyone? Maybe you could comment. Are you suggesting there should be at least two types of citizenship? Indigenous citizens and non-Indigenous citizens? Should a big part of Australia be set aside as an Indigenous nation with which treaty could be negotiated?
I can't speculate too much on that. I can't. What I do know that needs to happen is that we do need to sort out our own representation. Maybe through, like I've mentioned before, through the example of the Sami Parliament. I'm not asking for the idea of dual citizenship, but I am asking for the recognition that Indigenous peoples do hold a unique position and relationship to this country that stems outside of the idea of what Australian citizenship actually entails.
Yeah. Now, Leanne Windle has just posted that, Peter, what do you think of us mob having our own parliament?
Yeah, I'm all for it. We definitely need it. It is an active, well, it is exercising self-determination. It is taking back control of our affairs. And it is, you know, ensuring that our cultural processes are adhered to. You know, we constantly fall trapped to governmentalities, and we always come out with the same outcomes as well.
Yeah.
2 steps forward and 3 steps back every time we take a westernized approach. Our systems are bulletproof. We have got 80,000 years that support that claim.
That's so true. I mean, what are we, you know, in our parliament is suppose we're moving towards a referendum, but there's blockages being put in the way all the time, and with it seems to be a difficult situation where they seem to be putting off the referendum that was promised.
Well, in all honesty, you know, I don't see why not. I don't see why a referendum can't go ahead. It'll reveal 2 things, you know. It'll reveal either non-Indigenous people actually are easily conned, especially with major PR, like I've mentioned. Or it can also reveal that the rest of the population doesn't actually want to see Indigenous people progress.
Yeah, I see how that can happen, and we could, it seems.
Yeah.
Now, there's a question posed here from Ian to everyone, but also to you, Lynda.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any value at all in agitating for the voice to Parliament, or do you oppose it altogether?
No, I don't oppose it altogether. I don't really have much to say about it, other than I think it's a distraction, to tell you the truth. I don't openly agitate against the Uluru Statement, although I've been I've been on the receiving end. Yeah, no. However, blackfellas within that space want to, you know, how they perceive a way forward, then that's their prerogative.
Yeah.
You know, I'm held accountable to my elders, to my community, and their aspirations for freedom and liberation. I can't speak for other mob.
Yep. Thank you. Now, Julie, as many other people have thanked you for your courage in sharing your knowledge and experience tonight.
Oh,
Then she goes, can you please expand on the scope or practice when you said take the land back?
Well, it's a form of restitution in that giving back land, it is a process of compensation. It is a form of compensation. There are areas right throughout the country, and I want to speak about New South Wales in particular, such as Aboriginal missions and reserves that can be handed back to our mob. As I mentioned before, national parks and recreational spaces, as well as stock routes and crown lands as well, can be returned to mob. It ensures that we are able the space to practice our culture, our land management, our agriculture as well. And it gives us the sense of purpose, which we've been denied.
Yeah. Phil posts, many of us in the reconciliation movement do join the protests and rallies, but we can't fully feel the anger First Nations peoples do, but often hide. But we need to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I mentioned, there's nothing stopping white people from galvanizing an anti-colonial effort.
Yes, of course. Now, Bernadette mentions Lynda. Also, what was said about Uluru? So, what was said about Uluru is so important. White people too willing to listen to the rot that happened. This yarn is so important to be shared for listening.
Yeah, what we've experienced, the now infamous walkout group, is we've been marginalised. Our voices have been marginalised entirely from being even involved. Yeah, so it feels like as if we're being ostracised, and there's a if anything, it felt like I was under surveillance by the Uluru Statement mob there for a while. Any kind of backlash, and I had them pounce straight onto me in social media. No, you know, I don't knock them, but a lot of them have made successful careers out of campaigning for the Uluru Statement.
Yeah. And then we, how can, Phil mentions also, how can First Nations people decide on clans, mobs, nations or other groups that will have their own treaty with self-determination?
I don't understand the question.
I know. There's a comment more from
Okay.
from Phil, just to
yeah.
I'm just running down, and from Georgina on the Gabwarang destruction, right to the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and Women, Minister for Planning, Minister for Transport Infrastructure, Minister for Roads and Road Safety, Minister for Police, Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change, Minister for Ringwood.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've heard on the news just in the last days or so that sacred trees have been destroyed for the for a highway.
Yeah, that's correct.
For a highway going through, yeah.
That's correct. And it's only going to cut 3 minutes off that travel time as well.
Mm.
Mm. And can I just mention these trees, the directions tree and the grandmother and grandfather tree are 800 years old.
Oh,
They are sacred trees. Over 50 generations of Aboriginal, of Djab Wurrung people have been born there. And
yes.
yeah, every time that a sacred site is desecrated, our people are in a state of mourning.
Yeah. I totally understand.
Those sites, those trees are actually our elders. They are living, breathing part of who we are. And absolutely. No trees, no treaty.
Here.
Mm.
Bernadette comments, Australia is nothing without its black soul. Thank you, Georgina, for the link above. Signed now with 205,000 signatures. We'll keep writing and calling. As Lynda stated, we need systemic change with non-violent direct action. The voice is a distraction. Yes, move away from self-appointed leadership. For example, Tony Abbott.
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh, yes.
And Philip, to everyone, mentioned also that citizenship is akin to assimilation. No recognition of sovereignty as a citizen.
Yeah.
And Georgina, again, adds, John Howard has much to answer for and caused profound damage. For example, with the ongoing Northern Territory intervention, the locally appointed First Nations people from country can only speak for country. Lynda, take heart. People are hearing and listening. We hear and know processes manipulated. We know of self-appointed so-called leaders. Truth-telling, acknowledgement of sovereignty, treaties, perhaps one day, cultural integrity. Yolngu have a 5-tiered system of parliament. That and their ongoing law needs to be recognised, and they continue to call for treaty now.
Yeah. And that's a representation of the distinct political systems that are still operating in this country today. As I've mentioned, Indigenous nations still have these processes intact. The difficulty is that, you know, areas such as New South Wales, where I'm from, where it's been heavily hit with invasion and colonisation and the pastoralist economy, a lot of our systems have been eroded, and through, well, we are not in a position to recognise native title. If anything, we refute native title in that it maintains Western colonial law. We've always upheld the position that we are a sovereign people and that we've never surrendered, and to this day, unless our law and our systems are recognised, we're not in a position to compromise. Yeah. We've lost so much. And if we continue to compromise, there'll be nothing left for the future.
I have a question here from Phil. Thank you for that. Should every clan have a treaty, or every nation have one, or something else?
I think what needs to happen is there needs to be a national dialogue amongst First Nations first. There needs to be a coming together for us mob to map out a pathway and build some consensus there from the outset. You know, we've never been allowed to come together as mob. We've never witnessed a national convergence of 500 different nation groups. If that can come about, then we will have a mandate that we can say that holds cultural integrity, that it has been done under our laws and our protocols, and it isn't fraudulent. So I can't stipulate around a national treaty or clan-based treaties. I can say that as a Wiradjuri person, we want a clan-based treaty. Our needs and our aspirations are different to other mob around the country.
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting to hear. Lynda, Anne has asked, and it's very, very nice. She says, can you tell us about FISTT, the Fighting in Solidarity Towards Treaties?
Sure. FISTT came about, was organised by my brother, George, actually, in 2016. Him, our cousin Harry and Brent organised FISTT. What they actually did, though, was put my face on the front of it. Yeah, so I've been carrying this kind of, you know, leadership profile of FISTT for a while now, but no, it's built up. It's comprised of young Indigenous peoples, myself, my relatives, Gwenda Stanley, who's a prominent Aboriginal activist as well, and other mob throughout the country who are advocating for Black liberation. As I mentioned, our intention was to raise the issue of a national treaty. However, we are now focusing on clan-based treaties and the need for Indigenous peoples to unite under a common cause.
Yeah. That sounds very interesting, and it really worked well with maybe, you know, an Indigenous Parliament.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. That's been a real insight for me tonight too, to hear about that, and it sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, there are other alternatives and other solutions that we don't engage with. You know, an advisory body, as I've mentioned, it just, without veto, it becomes powerless and just symbolic, if anything. There's been talk about seats in Parliament as well, which is modelled in New Zealand through the Treaty of Waitangi. You know, here in Australia, though, as I've mentioned, with 500 different nation groups, we actually are a confederacy. And we need to have that representation sorted out before we can map something going forward.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Now, Leanne Windle has posted, we lose a part of our souls and our connections to country and ancestors when our sacred sites, languages, culture, and so much more is desecrated, blown up. We lose so much knowledge also when our sites are blown up, such as Adani. We can never get this back. It's time for people to wake up and stand up for us as allies and realise what is happening.
Absolutely.
And announcing restrictions, and we focus on this, then it comes out that sacred trees are cut down. Distraction ploy. Sorry.
Absolutely, sis, I'm with you there. You know, every time this happens, a part of our future is erased. You know, a whole part of our knowledge system is eliminated. You know, our knowledge system is based on the land. Our identities are too. And every time one of these sites are desecrated, a part of us dies too.
Yeah, that's it's so powerful. Georgina, can I read out Georgina's post to everyone? Sacred trees destroyed on Wonnarua Country, devastating like Juukan Gorge, totally devastating. Colonialisation continues. As Lynda says, decolonise. Us non-Indigenous, we need to listen and read. An excellent book which will challenge us is a must-read for all. Sarah Madison, The Colonial Fantasy, Why White Australians Can't Solve Black Problems. I guess it's published in April 2019.
Absolutely, absolutely. But white people can solve white problems. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely.
We sure make them. We sure make enough of them. I can just go on and mention. It's from Georgina again. No, fighting in solidarity towards treaties is a social and political initiative aiming to represent and liberate Australia's First Nations people.
Yeah. That's the objective behind FISTT. We also have been effective in public disobedience and disruption as well. We led the campaign against Channel 7 Sunrise when they had an all-white panel calling for another stolen generation, and I can't state too much, but we've taken them to the federal court.
Yeah. Philip posts, stay away from the white system of government. It is based on lies and deceit. You hear.
Good advice, Phil.
Lynda sending from Georgina. Lynda sending you a friend request. Full strength, sister.
No worries. No worries. I'll keep an eye out for it.
Look, Lynda, I've been going through the posts, and there's so many people who've said, yeah, Georgina, love you, Lynda. We are the problem. There's been so many. I haven't been able to necessarily read out all the responses to your talk tonight, but it's been truly warm and it's gratefully received from you. So many people saying thank you so much for speaking to us.
No, it's been an honour. It's been a privilege in talking to you and sharing my experiences. It's been a privilege. Thank you. And I'm even more blessed that I get to see some familiar faces too.
Yeah. There's a lot of support. There's so much.
Can I also just quickly mention, I'd like to acknowledge the work that Sabine continues to do. You know, she's been a solid ally since I've known her, actually. She was a student of my Uncle Paul's at the Wonnarua College. And I remember, because I was working at the reception, and Sabine walked through the door, and she was, she said, I want to take this course. And it was a course in Aboriginal Studies. And I said, are you sure you're in the right place? And she, she said, no, yes, this is the course that I want to take. And yeah, I've bumped into her over the years. And it's really heartwarming to see her grow and become so empowered in fighting for injustice. So yeah, Sabine, sister girl, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to have Sabine here to help with the getting us ready with Rumi for the technology, and we thank them. We thank them both very much for their support in enabling us to present this tonight. Linda, unfortunately, I know that we could go on, and I'd love to be able to go on and read the glowing thanks that we have for you, but the Zoom meeting will have to end shortly, and I just have to make a few further announcements. Now, remember, firstly, thank you again very much for speaking to us tonight. It's been so powerful to listen to what you've got to say and how you say it. So I'm very grateful, and thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you very much, everyone. Take care and safe journey.
Yeah. Just on another matter, for the thanks to Sabine and Brumi, who have been able to film tonight, just like last week's with Dijon and the earlier speakers in the month. But I need to remind you that next Wednesday we're on again on the 4th of November. We have Tom Mayor from Darwin, who has been intimately involved with the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And that will be on next Wednesday on the 4th. And the following week will be the final Building Bridges session. And we'll be hearing from Auntie Anne Paulina, who'll be talking to us about first law justice. So on this note, I'd like to thank everyone for joining and coming tonight, and for joining in with the chat. That's been really so fascinating for me to listen and be able to ask Linda, or ask her to comment at least. So on this note, I'd like to I'll bring an end to tonight. Sabine was very worried about the timing, but we've got 2 minutes. With 2 minutes spare, and I'm really not able to talk on for much longer. But just again, thank you to everyone for joining tonight, and special thanks again to Linda for speaking to us and really opening our eyes and making us think more about the Indigenous representation, and in making a real voice and uncovering all the colonialism that is still a part of society in Australia today. Thank you, everyone, and good night. See you next week. Bye-bye.